how's it going? Thad Brown here with you on the Endgame Thursday, March the 29th. The tournament is back. We won't be talking about that much today. Mostly going to talk about the NFL. Bills primarily. What does Buffalo do from here? Still a whole lot of offseason left. Still plenty of holes to fill. I've got a plan for what Brandon Beane should be doing over the next few weeks. Plus, what does the NFL do with the tush push? And why is it staying? And why is it bad that it's staying? We're going to hit on all that. Plus a whole lot more today on the Endgame, as always, here as we head into the weekend. Major League Baseball is underway. The Mets, last I saw, had a big lead on Paul Skeens. Knocked Skeens out in the first inning today. Heck of a job by that Mets offense. I think it was Beatty had a 3-run triple or something like that. I'm going to fire the internet up here so I can keep track of what's going on baseball-wise as well. So a lot to get to, but as we usually do, as we often do, we're going to start with the Bills, with the NFL. And like I said at the top of the show here, there is still plenty of time left in the offseason and plenty of work left to do if you are one Brandon Beane. And I think we free agency this year is kind of weird in that it feels like it all happened like in the first 3 days, and then it's been like nothing for days, almost a week now. And usually what'll happen is you get a flurry early for sure. But then there's still, a couple signings here, a couple signings there. It's really felt like for the last week that free agency has been over. That portion of the season has been completed, as if it's like the draft, which is 3 days. We did a week and a half of free agency, and now it's done. When in reality, free agency will continue all the way up until the Super Bowl. I mean, the Bills, one of their best receivers, they signed in November. So we are far from done with the acquiring of players, with the adjusting, the improving, the augmenting of this roster. And like I said, the Bills have plenty of work to do. And I think there are still a number of free agents who are available, who can help the Bills, who might be able to fit into what's left of their salary cap. Now, with Ryan Vandermark going to Minnesota in the Bills' decision to not match the offer sheet that he signed with the Vikings. We haven't talked about that at all. Real quick on Vandermark. Look, this is a guy who I think is going to have a long career in the NFL as a swing tackle at minimum. He's an athletic guy. He's a tall guy, moves real well, and he can play both left and right tackle. Ryan Vandermark is the kind of guy that you're going to rarely hear about, but he's going to play 10 years. He's going to make like $50 million because experienced, dependable swing tackles are guys that are going to get paid money. And I think Vandermark's going to have that type of career. So it would be a guy certainly the Bills would like to have. But on the flip side, it's probably not a guy that you feel like you got to pay $4.5 million to. Especially when you have Tylen Grable on the roster, when you have Travis Clayton on the roster, when you have Chase Lunt on the roster, guys that you've spent resources on fairly recently. So I do think the Bills got worse depth-wise on the offensive line. But I understand the move. Even I'll tell you what, though, if it were me, I like Vandermark a whole lot more than I like Grable or Lunt. Clayton is kind of a product. He's an international guy, so different category. If it were me, I would have held on to Vandermark. I would have paid him the $4 million. But I do understand the decision. So the bright side of that, the silver lining of that is the Bills now do have an extra $4 million in cap space. And they got about $13 million in cap space. And even though you got to save about $3 million of that for draft picks, and you got to save maybe $5 million or more of that on an emergency fund, you can do a good chunk of things with $5 or $6 million in cap room, depending on what kind of contracts you can agree to or get players to agree to. So the Bills aren't done and can really make a few different moves here. And if they wanted to find more money somewhere else, there are other smaller things the Bills could do to open up a little cap space. But right off the bat, the number one guy who's available right now, who I would be interested in the Bills signing, is a linebacker from the Giants, Bobby Okereke. Now, this is a guy who has played a lot of 3-4 defense, a little bigger, stronger linebacker than what the Bills have. He's 6'2", 235. Terrell Bernard goes about 220. So some more size there. He's not a big old school thumping type linebacker, but there's a guy that can handle, playing the inside in a 3-4. Because the thing with 3-4 linebackers, simple math is that if there are less defensive linemen in front of you occupying blockers, it's more likely you're going to have to take on one of those guys. It doesn't work out like that nearly 100% of the time, but just in general, you want a bigger linebacker for that reason. So Okereke has been a multi-year starter. He also has been someone who has played with new Bills inside linebacker coach John Agorogu. So there's a connection to the current coaching staff. There's a guy who is familiar with the scheme and someone who's been a dependable starter. And Okereke, I think, is in the neighborhood of 28, 29 years old. I'll look that up quick while I'm talking. So he's not, this isn't Bobby Wagner who is available that you're trying to grab at like 37. This is a guy that's still, I don't want to say in the prime, but I think with linebackers, certainly when you're before 30 years old, you can still play. I mean, like Bobby Wagner is proving, you can be a linebacker in the NFL and be effective pretty deep into your 30s. So age is not really a concern. Experience is not a concern. Ability probably isn't a concern. I don't know if he's going to go to a Pro Bowl anytime soon, but this is a guy that can play in the league. The concern is the price, because Okereke was projected by Spot Track to be a $12 million a year guy. Now, like we just talked about, the Bills have about $13 million in cap room in its entirety, and that's not even including the money, about half of that at minimum, that you got to save for your draft picks and for your emergency slush fund. But Bobby Okereke was projected to be a $12 million guy when free agency started. That Spot Track projection was from a month ago. Bobby Okereke doesn't have a team still. He's still available. So the longer a guy like that is out there, the more likely he is to agree to something that probably was less than he expected or hoped for when March began. Now, could Okereke be in Buffalo's price range right now? Probably not, considering that they have multiple needs they have to fill. I think if you're going to get Okereke right now, the discounted contract is probably something in the 9 to 10 million per year range. Now, could you sign him, 2 for 10 or 2 for 20? I mean, so it's 10 mil per, but you push 15 or 16 of that into next year or into a void year? Sure. But that's still 3 or 4 million in cap room. And like we said, the Bills' spending room, the amount of cap space they can use on guys like this, might be 6 or 7 million. So if you're going to commit 4 million of that to Okereke, then everybody else after that is pretty much a minimum contract guy. And you could go that route. We're going to talk about other guys the Bills might be interested in. I don't think any of these other guys are going to command multi-millions of dollars like Okereke can. But when you're starting with a guy who is in the 12 million per year range, I think it's tough at this point to see that he would fit into what kind of space the Bills have left. But again, that's today. The longer Okereke sits unemployed, the more likely he's going to be to take a further reduced deal. And I don't think the Bills and Okereke's price range are too far apart at this point. And I think it would make sense because the Bills cannot go into the draft with their linebacker situation as is. Because right now their inside linebackers are Dorian Williams and Terrell Bernard. Neither one of them are really, really built to be a ideal 3-4 inside linebacker. And I'm not sure Dorian Williams is ready to be an off-ball regular starting linebacker in the NFL at all. He's close, and there's been improvement. But if I'm the Bills, I am not relying on those two guys to be my linebackers. Now, the Bills might find somebody in the draft. It's a decent linebacker draft, and there's been C.J. Allen has been projected to go to the Bills in a couple different mocks I've seen. So it's not out of the realm the Bills solve this linebacker issue in the draft. But what teams prefer to do, and we've talked about it multiple times, and what Brandon Beane has done multiple times when it comes to how you operate in free agency, you do not want to go into the draft with an obvious need somewhere. And right now the Bills have a pretty obvious need when it comes to linebacker. So I think that's something they would want to address. The other thing with linebacker, I mean, there are certainly lesser guys that you could go out and find as a solution here to augment what you have. But the linebacking core in terms of guys you could depend on to be a starter is pretty much the really old guys like Bobby Wagner, Okereke, and then minimum salary reserve type players. Just going back through the Bills depth chart, remind myself, Joe Andreessen, Jimmy Charlo is on the roster, and Keontae Jenkins. These are not guys. Joe Andreessen's a solid special teamer in reserve. I don't want to be starting Buffalo Joe at inside linebacker right now. So the Bills need somebody here. And I would be surprised if they don't address this position between now and the draft. Doesn't have to be today, but I don't think if you're Buffalo, you want to walk into the draft because you want to be able to use these draft picks on impact, franchise-altering players, and that's not usually a linebacker. The thing that you get in the draft that significantly changes the trajectory of your franchise is usually a more high-leverage position. Quarterback, obviously, left tackle, receiver, corner, edge, guys like that. And the Bills have needs at a few of those positions. So you don't want to walk into the draft thinking, well, I want to try and get a receiver or an edge, especially in a draft that's so deep that you can find guys second, third round, even early fourth round that are really high-level potential impact players at receiver and edge. Those positions are really deep this year. You do not want to have to walk into there thinking, I'd love to take advantage of that, but man, I got to find a linebacker because we cannot play the defense we want to play with the group we currently have. So I think at some point the Bills are going to have to address linebacker, and Okereke is the guy that I would like the best in terms of the linebackers that are available. And he would fit in so many ways, fit really easily. Just a matter of, is he going to be in the Bills' price range? Now, another guy that would be an option and would make a lot of sense is Shaq Thompson, who brings some similar traits to Okereke. He doesn't have the connection to the current coaching staff that he did with Sean McDermott, and he certainly doesn't have a connection to the new incoming defensive staff, but he has been in Buffalo recently, so he knows the organization to a degree. He certainly knows the head coach. It's not a brand new head coach to him. So there's some connection with Shaq Thompson. And I think Shaq Thompson walked into the offseason feeling like I played well enough to get paid. I've played well enough that I should be able to get myself a contract. And I don't think he's wrong, but that contract has not materialized yet. So no matter what I think, what he thinks, till someone actually puts that number on a piece of paper, it don't really matter. So if Okereke maybe is too rich for the Bills' blood, Shaq Thompson, I think, is another very reasonable option when it comes to free agent linebackers. I'm going to try and flip through the current linebackers quick to see if there's anybody else that really stands out in terms of guys who are available. I remember the couple of different times I've looked at it, and I've looked at it a few different times, that Okereke was really the guy that stood out to me that makes sense, and Shaq Thompson was kind of like my plan B. Come on, Internet. Do your thing. Here we go. Yeah, I mean, Logan Wilson just retired. He's still on this list. Kenneth Murray did not have a very good year. Devin Bush, I think, is too small to fit in this defense. And then you're talking about Landon Roberts is going to be 32 basically tomorrow. Jermaine Pratt's another guy I like, by the way. Recently of the Colts, pretty regular starter of note. So that's another guy who I think might be on the short list for linebackers. And he went into the offseason with a $3 million market value, not Okereke's $12 million. So that certainly benefits the Bills. So there are a couple options out there. And again, I would be very surprised if the Bills do not do something at linebacker between now and the end of April when the draft happens. Now, linebacker is just one step for the Bills. I think they also need to add a little bit on the defensive line. And the guy that I would suggest for that is DJ Reader, who is well-known nose tackle, played for the Bengals, Texans, most recently of Detroit. Going to be 32 soon. So on the older side, but look, D linemen, especially guys whose job it is to just be big and plug a hole, can play fairly well into their 30s. He's a guy that had a $3 million market projection, so certainly within the Bills' price range. And I think just a dependable nose tackle that can eat up some run defense snaps. Because right now, the guy that makes the most sense for the Bills to be that elite, just line clogger in the middle of the defense is Deon Walker. But what we found out from last year is that Deon Walker can do more things than just be a really big guy and stands in the middle of the defensive line. He's got some wiggle. He's got some pass rush ability. So I don't think the Bills may want to just lock Deon Walker into that run-stopping role to where he's playing first and second down all the time. You want that guy on the field for some third downs. You look at the Bills' current roster in terms of best pass rushers in the defensive line, it's probably Bradley Chubb, Greg Rousseau, and Ed Oliver, and Deon Walker. So if you're going to take a front four, and I know the Bills play a 3-4 defense now, but there's going to be some snaps, a number of them, where they're going to rush what was more an old school 4-man defensive line. You want Deion Walker on that on 3rd and long. So DJ Reader can be the guy who can help eat up the 1st and 2nd down snaps so that Deion Walker is fresh and available for 3rd down. I think there are a number of guys at this spot too that are more so than linebacker. I think you could, if you want to find kind of the random, for lack of a better term, interior defensive lineman to kind of eat up run snaps, there are some options here. Who else did I like in this spot? You know, guys like Greg Gaines, who's a 29-year-old, is okay. Mario Edwards has been in the league a little while. Foley Fatukasi is a guy I like, but I guess he hasn't played very well lately. You bring Daquan Jones back, I guess, if you had to, although I don't really think he fits this defense. So there are some options. I think the Bills have a little more to pick from at defensive line, only because compared to linebacker, I think the Bills are looking for a guy who's going to be a starter, who's going to play potentially 80 to 90 to 100% of snaps. With interior D-line, especially in a reserve role, you're looking for someone that can play 30 to 40% of snaps. So I think that the margin for error about who you want to grab in that spot becomes larger because you're not depending on that guy as much as you might depend on the linebacker. So Reader, I think, is the guy who is at the top of the list of what makes the most sense for the Bills. But I do think there's more options here than there might be at linebacker, again, just considering the role they want to play. So again, my offseason plan from here for the Bills, linebacker, probably Bobby Okereke, defensive line, probably DJ Reader. And then after that, I would want to find a reserve corner somewhere as well. Because again, at corner, the Bills right now have Christian Benford, totally fine. One of the best in the league. Max Hairston, decent reason for optimism. Dude can still fly. I don't think he fits in this defense great. But we just saw with Cole Bishop, you can have a rookie that has that injury impacted year, that has that rookie year just kind of ruined because he gets hurt in training camp, and turn around in year 2 and be fine. So there are 2 really solid options for the Bills at corner. But after that, there's virtually nothing. So and in case Max Hairston does not work, you need to find somebody else who can play outside. I mean, in a pinch, D. Alford could do it. And I do like Dorian Strong as an option. But again, none of these guys, right now the Bills as they stand, are one injury away to either Hairston or Benford from being at just about a full-blown crisis at corner. And look, it's mid-March, late March. It's not a big deal. There's plenty of time to fill the spot. But again, you want to fill that spot. Because like I said, when the Bills go into the draft, I think they want to dip into that big bucket at receiver and that other big bucket at edge. Just like a linebacker, you do not want to walk into the draft feeling like, boy, we don't have any protection at corner. So in terms of the corners, the corner market is a little different than linebacker or defensive line in that the guys who are available right now are actually pretty talented and almost maybe too talented to where they might not be interested in being a backup for the Bills. So at the top of the list of corners available, it's Marshawn Lattimore, it's Trayvon Diggs, L'Jarius Sneed. And these guys were elite Pro Bowl players about 3 seconds ago. Maybe Diggs a little less than the other 2 guys. But these are high-level players, and what the Bills don't need, I don't think the Bills want a starter. They want someone who's going to be a dependable backup and start if Max Hairston doesn't work out or if someone gets hurt. I don't know how well you sell that to a Marshawn Lattimore. Lattimore. I think I pronounced that incorrectly. The one guy of that group, though, and really when you look through the corners, because after those 3 guys, if you start going through the rest of the corner group in terms of, who could you grab to be a dependable third corner, after that, you're talking about Rasul Douglas and Adoree Jackson isn't terrible. Avonte Maddox, Nick McCloud. There's no one on here who you look at and say, I feel good about that guy if he's got to start on my team for a month, 2 months, half a season. Now, obviously, Tre'Davious White's still out there, and I think he would work pretty well. I don't know if he wants to come back as much because it's not a Sean McDermott team anymore. I still think he likes Buffalo and would want to be there. I don't know if there's a mutual interest either. But in terms of the reserve guy who's going to be okay in that role, but still is good enough to where you can feel good about him playing if he has to play for a while, Tre'Davious White's like the only guy that's available that falls in that category. Everybody else is either going to probably feel they're too good to be a backup or they're not good enough to where you don't want them to play. So of those options, if the Bills don't want to go with Tre'Davious White, and I think White does make a lot of sense, but if they don't want to go that way, I will throw Trayvon Diggs out as a possibility. Now, look, we know his game. It's almost all or nothing. He's got 20 interceptions, like half a dozen touchdowns. My man can make the big play, or at least did 2 or 3 years ago. His last couple years have not been as good. But the overall numbers as a corner are not great because of, assumably, the all or nothing style. However, that does fit on what Buffalo wants to do, right? This Jim Leonard defense is going to be more of an attacking style. Let's blitz. Let's go create plays. Let's create chaos. Trayvon Diggs is your guy for that. And again, of the guys at the top of the list who are available when it comes to free agent corners, Diggs is a guy that I think is more likely to potentially accept a backup role or at least a competitive, I'm going to compete for a starter role than the other guys who are available. So I wouldn't discount Trayvon Diggs if the Bills don't want Tre'Davious White. Tre'Davious White is the safe play when it comes to the third corner. Trayvon Diggs is the fun, interesting play. And the other thing is, as much as Tre'Davious White was a revelation last year, he is 31. He'll be 32, early next year. So this is a guy with corners. They're more like receivers and running backs to where once you hit 30, it is tough to keep that player around and productive. So, 31, 32-year-old corner is a big-time risk. Trey White was so good, I would feel confident in bringing him back in as a third corner. But one of the reasons why he might have been as good as he was last year is because he already knew the defense. Damar Hamlin talked about this. I'm always going to remember this when it comes to knowing a defense. When Damar Hamlin had the great training camp and kind of won a safety job out of camp, one of the things he said was, I've been in this defense a number of years, so I can just play free. I'm not thinking. Well, Trey White, last year in the Sean McDermott defense, there's a guy that doesn't have to think. I'm sure he walked right back in, knew exactly where to be, what to do, what everybody else around him is doing, and that's going to make a guy play better. Well, Trey White doesn't have that anymore. Trey White's like everybody else. It's not a new team, but it is a new defense and a new scheme. So I don't know if Trey White, especially at 31 plus, is going to be able to play as well as he did last year. End of the day, though, I do think the options at corner for the Bills are 31-year-old Trey White or trying to get one of these more star-level players to accept a reserve or a competitive role. And of those choices, it's not easy, but I would go Trayvon Diggs. I think there is an opportunity there to bring a guy in who's going to attack, who's going to create plays. Now, you can make the argument that, well, the Bills already have that in C.J. Gardner-Johnson. Do you want to put both those guys on the field at the same time? I think that makes some sense. I think you have a good case there that might not be the way to go. But when it comes to free agency, big picture here, the Bills still need, I think, for sure a linebacker. I'd like to see some help on the D-line, most likely on the interior. You can sell me at an edge, though. And I do think you got to find somebody else that you can depend on to be your third corner in case you have a problem. I don't think the Bills are looking for a starting corner for sure, but you need some sort of depth. So if you do that, what do the Bills now? That's only the free agent part of the plan. What do the Bills do now in the draft? If it were me, I would go edge in round 1 and then receiver in round 3. And look, a lot of this is dependent on how guys fall in the draft, who gets picked where. It's impossible to sit here and predict what's going to be available for the Bills at 26, let alone 96, right? Or whatever their third round pick is. I think it's 96. But sitting here right now in terms of when guys are likely to be available, I love Cassius Howell for the Bills' first round pick. This is the defensive end, the edge Speedy, bendy, can drop into coverage. Just your prototypical, he's going to blow around an offensive tackle before they have a chance to get set. Really good motor. He's on the smaller side, and most of the draft experts don't think he's a guy you can depend on against the run. I think he holds his own better than most other people do. But in terms of being a pass rusher, a guy who can just, again, create plays, create chaos, I'm a big fan of Cassius Howell. The knock on him, as you may have heard, is that he has historically short arms. I mean, not just like shorter than normal, like some of the shortest that have ever been measured among edge rushers. But to me, the pluses far more outweigh the minuses. And again, I talked about it earlier. The draft is where you find your guys that can be impact, franchise-altering type players, especially round one. And Cassius Howell has a franchise-altering upside. If he hits, this is going to be, Jalen Phillips level. I don't want to throw out the elite guys, the Micah Parsons, that kind of thing. He might not be able to have that in his range. But he could be really, really good. And for a Bills team that's been starving for that threatening edge that offenses absolutely have to plan for week after week, Cassius Howell 1,000% could end up that guy. And it wouldn't even take that much of a leap. His rush game is pretty polished, needs some work there. But this is a guy that can really, really have an impact at the next level. And I see almost every mock draft has him available to the Bills. Most mock drafts I look at right now are one of two options with the Cassius Howell. Either the Bills take him or he goes after Buffalo's pick, sometimes in round 2. So Cassius Howell to me is the guy I would prefer the most for the Bills in round 1. And then in round 3, you can get your receiver. Now, there are like 15, 16, 17 receivers who will go in the top 100 this year. And the difference from Carnell Tate, who's probably the number 1 receiver, down to whoever 17 is, ain't that big a deal. The thing about this draft, and this doesn't go just for receiver, the top of this draft is awful. My draft hot take right now is that no one in this draft would go in the top 10 of a regular draft. And maybe the more accurate take is no one in this draft would go in the top 10 of a good draft. Regardless, there are not elite talents at the top of this draft. Not Fernando Mendoza, not Arvell Reese, not David Bailey, not Ruben Bain. These are all really good players, don't get me wrong. And I wouldn't be stunned if a few of them have excellent Pro Bowl level careers. But sitting here in late March and heading into April, the guys that you're going to see go top 5, top 10 all have significant flaws relative to the spot they're going to be drafted. And it's unlike most other top 5, top 10 picks you'll see. I mean, there's no Penei Sewell in this draft. There's no Myles Garrett. There's no Trevor Lawrence. There's no Rome Odunze, Marvin Harrison, Sauce Gardner, Daryl. I mean, none of those guys are like the top 10 picks that the Bills or that the NFL is going to have this year. So when you think about the receiver position, which I know you do if you're a Bills fan, you don't need to spend a high pick to get a guy you like. You don't have to trade up either. Saw some people suggesting early that the Bills would want to trade up from 26 to whatever to get Jordan Tyson or Mekhi Lemon or Tate, the generally consensus top 3 receivers in this draft. Don't bother. Don't waste your draft ammunition when you can sit at 26 and grab a receiver that's just as good. You can sit at 96. And the guy I want for the Bills in round 3 right now is a guy named Ted Hurst. You probably heard of him. Went to Georgia State, so he's got a small school red flag in that he didn't play like the SEC or the Big Ten for most of his college career. Only in college for 2 years, too. But he's 6'4" and runs a 4.4. Look, you can close your eyes as a receiver and not watch a single piece of film. And if I tell you the guy is 6'4" and runs a 4.4 40, you should be interested right off the bat. And that's where we start with Ted Hurst. He can make the catch down the field. I would like to see more receptions considering the radius that he has, but still he's fine. Catch and run, he's good after the catch. The other concern with Hurst is that he's only 206 pounds, and at 6'4", that's relatively thin. So you worry about him going up against physical guys. But again, we're talking about, pick 96. In this draft, there's nobody clean at pick 6. Pick 96 is going to have some issues. But I think the upside, similar to Cassius Howell, is really, really high for Ted Hurst. Again, 6'4", 4'4". If you can clean up the other stuff, any route running issues, and he's a pretty decent route runner, any reception hands issues, and again, I don't think he is not a negative hands guy. He's a plus hands guy. I just don't think he's the elite hands guy you might think of for someone who's 6'4". I'll live with that. With the way this guy can create after the catch, how dangerous he can be down the field, how much a threat he can be vertically, I will live with a couple of drops here and there, or a couple of contested catches he doesn't make. So if you're the Bills, if I'm Brandon Beane, I start by filling my linebacker spot with someone that I can trust to be a starter. I locate a couple of depth pieces on the D-line and at corner, and then I go into the draft ready to attack what's a really deep edge and receiver group. I want to go, if I'm the Bills, edge round 1, receiver round 3, but you can reverse it for sure. And if you want to go Denzel Boston, a guy like that, at the bottom of round 1, I think that makes a lot of sense, and grab your edge in round 3. That can work. I do think receiver is deeper than edge. I like the late second, third round, fourth round receiver options more than I like the edge options down there. So I would rather go edge round 1, receiver round 3. But again, you can do a number of things. Even though the Bills are currently sitting at pick 96, if you want to go from 96, take one of your 4th, 5th rounders, move up to something in the 70s, maybe high 80s, you can get an even better player, obviously. So there are options for the Bills. But I think Buffalo, like Brandon Beane normally does, needs to still fill in a few cracks. Linebacker's a glaring one. D-line and corner, especially from the depth point of view, is another one. All right, we're going to take a break here. When we come back, we just talked about what the Bills might want to do at receiver, right? Are they done? Could they be done at receiver? Should they be done at receiver? Remember, you just spent a big asset to get DJ Moore in town. I'm going to talk about that. And the tush push is not going anywhere. I don't like it at all. I'll explain why after a break. My name is Thad Brown. You're watching the Endgame. You're also watching Rochester First with the cool kids. They all call it Rock One. Thad Brown here, back with you on the Endgame. Remember, of course, you're watching Rock One. I want you to also watch Rock One a little later on tonight, because it is, of course, BKL Nightly night. BKL Nightly back again. We're going to talk more about the free agents that are available that might be of interest to the Bills. Caleb Carr, Rachel Albert will join me. We got a bunch of good suggestions for you, so please check that out right here on Rochester First tonight at 8:30. So we talked about how the Bills, or what I thought the Bills' plan should be for free agency, and that did not include any receivers. And I will say that, people have talked about Deebo Samuel. There are a number of guys who are out there who are available that certainly would help Buffalo, but I don't want to see the Bills, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, Juwan Jennings is, I think, the biggest name that's still available right now. I do think the Bills need help at receiver, need another player, but I don't think it should be a free agent spend. Short of, somebody way down, a guy like, who's available here? Like Juju Smith-Schuster would be okay with me if he wanted to play cheap. Scotty Miller, DeAndre Hopkins, I guess. I'm not a huge fan of that idea. But if you want to bring in a body, people have talked about Brandon Cooks. I wouldn't be against it. I do think that Cooks proved last year that I don't want to trust his hands in a big spot. Too many times last year, he would double catch a ball. In other words, the ball comes in, he has it, and then loses it, and then brings it in again. And it almost burned the Bills a couple times, and then obviously it did eventually burn the Bills on the overtime interception that Cooks has for a second, but then loses to Jaquan McMillan and turns into the Broncos game-winning score and the Bills' season-ending score. So I get Brandon Cooks as an idea, and he does bring a number of things. Certainly the veteran leadership, the ability to get down the field. That guy's not done. He still has juice, but I just don't trust his hands enough to where I want him to be an option. But bottom line, the Bills do need to add something else at receiver. I know you could sit here and say that Khalil Shakir and DJ Moore and Josh Palmer are a fine starting three, and they are. They're a very reasonable group to roll into the season with as your opening three. I mean, DJ Moore is still, like we've talked about, should be a pretty solid number one receiver. Khalil Shakir is, at the very worst, a dependable slot, if not one of the better weapons when it comes to that position. And Josh Palmer, we've seen him be functional, certainly a number of years with the Chargers. There were injury issues last year. There's reason to think that Palmer, in a more reserve or lower level role, can be really, really effective. But those three guys are not so good that it limits Buffalo to not trying to get something else a receiver. And even if you want to throw Keon Coleman into that as a fourth receiver with upside, and I mean upside, you know, I can see the eyes being rolled when I say upside, but it still is there. It's, like I said, it's a pretty reasonable group. But again, I would still want to add somebody else. And again, I want to get that guy in the draft because as free agency has kind of shown us this year, this is a trend. You're not getting an elite guy in free agency. DJ Moore is available in large part because he's coming off a 50-catch season that screams, I'm not a number one receiver anymore, even if there might be good reasons why that happened that are not related to who DJ Moore is as a player at this point. But even if none of those things are true, we talked last week about how at 29 years old, history and the odds say DJ Moore is probably not going to be that elite productive guy anymore. So again, there's a reason why a veteran receiver, this is not as a free agent in a trade, was available this time of year. You're not going to get a game-changing guy in March. Unless you're doing the Jalen Waddle trade for a first and a third and something else. And even then, I think the general consensus is that the Broncos probably paid a little more than Jalen Waddle's worth. And Jalen Waddle's going to a place where he might not even be the number one receiver. If you're a team like the Bills who's looking for that impact player, DJ Moore could be that. And look, I understand what the swing is here with DJ Moore. But the hard and fast, the most appropriate, the most likely to succeed way, if you want to add a receiver, is in the draft. So that's where I think the Bills should spend their next asset when it comes to improving that receiving core. But no matter what, just because the Bills traded a second to get DJ Moore does not mean that they should be done at receiver. And I have no problem. If you want to look at this draft, and what I talked about earlier, where the Bills take a receiver in round 3, as in the Bills are going to take their 3 most premium picks and use 2 of them at receiver, I'm cool. I'm good with that. This is a team that has not been good at addressing its pass catcher group over the last 4 or 5 years, basically since the Stephon Diggs trade. The Bills have done very little right at receiver. Khalil Shakir, even at pass catcher, might be it. I know Dalton Kincaid certainly can have an impact. He hasn't been healthy enough to have anything consistently as an impact. But since the Stephon Diggs trade, the only real success the Bills have had when it comes to their pass catchers is Khalil Shakir. So if they want to spend 2 picks out of the top 3 this year, the 2 on DJ Moore, the number 2 on DJ Moore, and something else on receiver, I am fine with that. And not only am I fine with it, I would encourage it. In part because of what this year's draft class looks like. If you want to try and get that other impact receiver in free agency, well, then you got to go play the game of Juwan Jennings, who had a market value before the free agency period began of $22 million. Debo was in the $15 million range. Do you want to mess around with Tyreek Hill or Stephon Diggs? Probably not. To me, the Bills need to still bring somebody else in at receiver that at the very least can compete with Josh Palmer to be the regular number 3. If you make Josh Palmer your 4, Yeah, is he going to be ridiculously expensive for a fourth receiver? Sure. But you know who's going to not care about that in January? Everybody, especially if the Bills are succeeding with this new talent-charged receiving core. So, yeah, even though DJ Moore is a part of this team now, I still don't think the Bills should be satisfied at receiver. And if we get to the end of April with no major additions at receiver and the highest draft pick Buffalo uses is like round 5, then I'll be disappointed. And I think you will be asking for trouble. You'll be asking for a similar outcome as what happened to this offense last year. I know DJ Moore can make an impact. And there's enough reason to believe that he can create enough change on this offense that you'll be satisfied that this Bills offense can take a step. But I don't want to put all my chips on that. I don't think there's any reason why the Bills can't spend some other higher asset on another potential impact receiver, especially because if DJ Moore works, maybe not the pie in the sky scenario, but the reasonable, I can see that happening and that's a good outcome for Buffalo, he's still a 1 or 2 year solution, probably at best. Why do you not want to dive into a receiver draft that's about as deep as you're ever going to see and try and grab another option from there? There's already a theory that you should probably draft a quarterback every year just because for the Bills, they should be drafting a receiver every year until they hit on one at this point. If the white whale is a quarterback for most teams, for Buffalo, it is the high-level drafted receiver. You don't got to get Justin Jefferson. You don't got to get JSN. Give me somebody who I can count on to be a consistent impact player. Give me Devonta Smith. Give me Jalen Waddle. Keep taking the swing at that position until you hit on something. And DJ Moore is not enough and should not be the end, even if he might be a really high-level impact player this year. One of the other Bills issues I want to address today is the number of free agents that are still available. So it's gotten a lot of talk on social media for the Bills. Right now, the Bills have 15 players officially, according to Spot Track, who are available as free agents, which is, I didn't go through everybody, but certainly it's going to be on the higher end of what teams have out there. And there's been a whole lot of discussion about what this means for the Bills, what the implication is about how Sean McDermott ran this team. Because right off the bat, if there are a lot of players who were on the team last year that no one wants this year, that means those players must be deficient in some way. And if you look at the names who are on that list, it's a lot of the guys who played big roles on defense. Joey Bosa, Matt Milano, Taylor Rapp, Trey White, Jordan Phillips, Jordan Poyer, Shaq Thompson. These are all among, that's half the Bills free agents right there. And every one of those guys at one point or another had significant roles on defense. Now, Taylor Rapp played less than half a season. Rapp and Poyer had essentially the same role. Jordan Phillips was a lower level role player, but those guys were they all ate up significant snaps last year. And right now, so far in March, nobody else wants them. So the question becomes, what do you make of Sean McDermott now that the players who were a big part of his defense, nobody else wants? The initial conclusion, and I think the thing that a lot of fans are pointing to as well, these are clearly McDermott guys, and McDermott must be the problem because his guys aren't guys that anyone else wants. And that has some merit. There might be a good argument there. The flip side, or maybe the other conclusion that I've seen going around today, and I subscribe to this one a little bit more, is that all these players that nobody wants, that were a big part of the Bills' defense last year and even a year or two before, Sean McDermott turned those guys into a decent defense. They were number 1 in the NFL in passing yards allowed last year. They were the talk of the league following the win over Jacksonville with how well McDermott and the players disguised and altered and changed coverages to fool Trevor Lawrence. I think the more likely conclusion you draw from what the Bills were and how little the players who made up that defense have apparently drawn attention on the open market, I think the more proper conclusion is that Sean McDermott was probably a pretty good coach to be able to turn those guys into even a functional defense for most of the year. And actually functional is underselling it. That defense was pretty good, above average for most of the year. And yeah, they gave up 33 points in the postseason. I mean, to be fair, a couple of those field goals were gifted by the offense. Josh Allen, end of the first half, the sack to start the second half. Those are not on the defense at all. I mean, literally, the defense was not on the field for one of the field goal drives. Now, doesn't mean 27 points, if you want to subtract those two field goals, was good. But when you get to the postseason and you have deficiencies when it comes to talent and personnel, the postseason is when you're going to find offenses and coaches who are more apt to take advantage of that, more apt to exploit it. A good coach is going to take an under par group of players and get them to play over their heads, be functional, be good enough when you're playing the Jets and the Browns and the Panthers. But when you get to the postseason, when you're going to get to the teams who are going to be in the Final Four, the Broncos, the Patriots, that's when that defense is going to be exposed. And that's probably why when people point to, well, Sean McDermott defense has always got killed in the playoffs, if you don't have the players, there ain't no coordinator in the world that's going to make that work. At some point in January, you got to have the players. And what we are finding out from free agency right now is that the Bills didn't have the players. Now, to be totally fair, as much as people want to debate what this says about Sean McDermott, the reality of the Bills' free agents that are still available is that most of them are either 30 or over 30, or they're coming off a major knee injury. I mean, think about the guys I just listed. Joey Bosa, over 30. Matt Milano, over 30. Taylor Rapp, major knee injury. Trey White, over 30. Jordan Phillips, Jordan Poyer, way over 30. Shaq Thompson, over 30. The reason these guys are available probably has nothing to do with what the Bills defense did last year or what Sean McDermott's work level was last year. These guys are just coming off injuries or are over the 30-year barrier. These guys are just players that teams wouldn't want in general for obvious reasons, namely age and injury history. I mean, the other guys on this list include Gabe Davis, major knee injury, Curtis Samuel, about to be 30 years old. So maybe we shouldn't, as I posted on X earlier today, don't miss the forest for the trees. The reason the Bills have so many recent players who are available is probably because they're all on the older side, or guys like Gabe Davis and Taylor Rapp are coming off significant knee injuries. These are all players that most teams would ignore early in free agency anyway. Now, there still could have implications to what Sean McDermott did, but I think let's Occam's razor this thing. Most likely it's just because these guys are old or recently broken down. I do understand, though, the kind of the knee-jerk of fans to want to put this on Sean McDermott. Because if you think about where the Bills are going into this season, remember, we've had multiple years of getting into the playoffs, getting close, divisional round losses, AFC championship losses. Getting over the hump is the phrase that is going to be beaten to death between now and training camp. How do you do it if you're the Bills? What things do you do differently? The number one thing they're doing differently is the head coach, obviously. It's not the only thing. They're also going with a new defensive coordinator, which obviously is related to the head coaching change, but that is a different thing. There's a new philosophy, a new style, a new scheme. And then the other major new thing is DJ Moore, a receiver who could be an impact player on offense. But if you're looking for reasons as a Bills fan or a Bills employee, a player, coach, anybody, to say, this year's going to be the year, it's DJ Moore, it's Jim Leonard, or it's moving on from Sean McDermott. And just as a human being, a natural psychological reaction to that If you are going to convince yourself that this is going to be your year, that this is going to be a different level of success for the Bills, there's going to be improvement, there's going to be a Super Bowl appearance, you almost have to convince yourself that Sean McDermott was the problem. Because Jim Leonard and DJ Moore could have an impact, but nothing's going to likely have an impact like changing the head coach will. So you need to believe that you've made the right decision, that Sean McDermott was the problem, and you have removed the problem. Because if Sean McDermott was not the problem, then the problem still exists, and where are the Bills going to go? So whether it's conscious or not, anyone wearing red, white, and blue in Western New York is going to have to get to a point where they feel like Sean McDermott was the problem. And that means, even as just a natural, again, human psychological reaction, you look at everything through the lens of, well, Sean McDermott did that. That was Sean McDermott's fault. This would have been better if Sean McDermott didn't handle it this way. This is why Joe Brady is at least getting viewed as a lens of someone who's going to bring a new view when it comes to keeping guys healthy with a practice schedule, sports science, all that stuff. And likely why this free agent situation where the Bills have a number of players still available has been viewed through the lens of, well, those were Sean McDermott guys. And Sean McDermott clearly has the wrong point of view or philosophy, because if it weren't for Sean McDermott, or if it weren't for these players that Sean McDermott wanted, the defense would have been better last year. And the other part of why I don't buy into let's put it on Sean McDermott and his defense as to why these players are available. Let's say that the argument is the defense didn't work because the players weren't good, but these were the players that Sean McDermott wanted. So Sean McDermott's the problem. That Sean McDermott went out and actively campaigned. These are the guys that work for my defense. These are the players I want. This is how my defense is going to be great. And now that the league doesn't want them, the argument is, well, Sean McDermott didn't know what he was doing, or didn't know what he was doing well enough. And you can make that argument, and there might be some credibility to that. But if you're going to continue that argument to the end, then what you're saying is Brandon Beane didn't have much say in how the roster was built. Brandon Beane was just doing what Sean McDermott told him to do to build the roster. So you're telling me, if that's what happened last year and the previous years where the Bills did not make the Super Bowl, well, then this year, not only do the Bills have a new defensive coordinator, not only do the Bills have a new head coach, but they also have a new, or at least a first-year general manager. Because you're telling me if Sean McDermott was calling the shots and built that roster that didn't work, the group of players that nobody wants, well, then you're also telling me Brandon Beane wasn't doing that. And now this year, he's doing it for the first time. Or you're telling me that Brandon Beane and Joe Brady will have a similar relationship to where these are Joe Brady's players. So now you're saying that not only is Joe Brady going to be a first-time head coach while he's still the offensive coordinator, but he's also going to be the general manager calling the shots on who the players are. Neither of those scenarios, the first-year GM or Joe Brady doing 3 jobs, sounds like a championship formula to me. Or at least not a formula that's going to happen in year number 1. Now, look, coaches and GMs don't work in a vacuum. Brandon Beane doesn't go out and assemble the roster and wakes up the head coach from a nap and says, here you go, here's the players you got. They absolutely work together all year long. So there is 100% going to be some degree of input from the head coach to Brandon Beane about the players that they want. But at the end of the day, the assembly of the roster, the collection of talent, is something that's going to be on the general manager, or at least it should be, over the head coach. It should be that way. It should have been that way last year when Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott were on even terms in the eyes of the owner, and it certainly should be that way now that Brandon Beane has been promoted to president and the head coach works underneath him. So there's no doubt that Sean McDermott had input on bringing in the players that the rest of the league now does not want. But the needle you're trying to thread to take Brandon Beane away from the responsibility for that and put it all on Sean McDermott really doesn't make much sense. And even if you want to try and thread that needle, like I said, then you're telling me that the Bills are going to win a championship this year with a GM who has an autonomy he's never had before, or a head coach who has never been a head coach who's now going to be doing 3 jobs: running the offense, running the team, and running the personnel. So I think it's hard to get to those points, even if I understand why fans and even employees might feel like that they have to, and feel like it's wrong, might even subconsciously feel like they have to take that point of view. All right, I'm out of time here, so I won't get to the tush push take, but don't you worry. I will save that one for Monday. I'm sure it'll still be a discussion as the owners' meetings happen over the weekend, and there's not going to be any change to that rule, so I can still hit on that on Monday as well. Thanks as always for watching the Endgame. I appreciate it. Enjoy your weekend. I'll be back on Monday with more probably on the Bills. We'll talk tournament and enjoy the start of the baseball season. Mets fans, congratulations. You guys are up 11-5 in the 7th inning. I believe you got this one. Knocked out Paul Skeens early. Good opener for you here. I'm Thad Brown. Thanks for watching the Endgame. We'll see you again on Monday.
Get the Rochester First streaming app today for everything you love from News 8 On Demand, plus exclusive shows you won't see anywhere else. Search ROC and download for free on Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV.